Hi, Yinnies. Welcome back to a Yin Yoga podcast. If you are familiar, welcome back. Thank you for choosing to once again spend some time with me today. And for those of you that are new to the podcast, welcome. If we have not met before, my name is Nick. I am a Yin Yoga teacher trainer, a yoga therapist, a yoga business mentor, and of course, I teach the general public as well. So that's me in a quick nutshell. Before we dive into today's topic, which is going to be about what do we do when we don't feel a yin yoga pose. We'll get to that in a moment. But before we do, I just wanted to mention that for those of you that have been listening and have been benefiting from all of the info that you get in these podcasts, I would be super grateful if you would pause this and just take a moment to offer a rating or a review. So whether you're in Apple or Spotify, you just actually click on the show itself. And then if you scroll down, it should give you an opportunity to give me 5 stars, which would be super appreciated. And then if you're on Apple, you can also offer a written review. That would be amazing. And I would be super grateful for that, for those of you that wouldn't mind taking 2 minutes to do that. If you're on YouTube watching this, and dear listener, did you know you can watch the full unedited versions on YouTube where I sit here and talk to you and drink my matcha, or, my guest and I sit here and talk to you. So you can also watch those. So if you are more visual than audio, those are available as well. And that's about all I want to say about that. I'd be really grateful if you'd offer a review. If you're on YouTube, you can't really review, but I would be super grateful if you would subscribe to the channel, give this video a like partway through, and then also at the end of the video or even partway through, if you've got any ahas that come up as you're watching, please just take a moment to let me know in the comments. That would be awesome. Okay. The other thing I want to mention very quickly is my Yin Yoga teacher training. At the time of this recording, it is still a 60+ hour, but I have a feeling it's going to go up shortly to a 75 hour. Stay tuned on that. And if you are a teacher who's got at least 200 hours of training and you're looking to take a yin training, or maybe you're looking to take another yin training because your first training was either great, but had some missing pieces, or maybe wasn't so great, then I would love to have you. So I get a good combination of people who have taken no yin training, and then also people who've taken a yin training, but really want to learn more about some of the things that I tend to focus on. As a yoga therapist, we are going to talk about trauma and how to make this practice therapeutic. And it's also nervous system based and steeped in traditional Chinese medicine. You can see a full write-up of what's in the program by clicking the link in the show notes that says join the waitlist. That'll take you to the page where it's got everything listed out that we go over. Some of the reasons you might want to go join the waitlist is that the first thing you'll get when you join the waitlist is a little PDF of a head to toe yin sequence as my gift to you, something that you can play with in your own body. If you aren't teaching yin yet, or if you are teaching, something you can share with your students. Then a few days later, you're going to get a video practice of that same sequence. So if you haven't practiced from the paper, you can practice from the video. Also along the way, you will get these podcast episodes emailed to you. You're going to get invitations to my quarterly free class. So I do a quarterly free class on Zoom. Sometimes it's a class, sometimes it's a mini workshop. And so you'll get invitations to those. You'll also get invitations to join my public yin classes on Zoom if you feel like you want somebody to hold space for you for a change. And then along the way, you're also going to get little sneaky peeks, little video clips of former trainings so that you can kind of get a little bit of a taste test as to what you might experience in the course. You will also get first notice when registration opens, which is why most people join. All these other things are nice bells and whistles, but being able to know first before I put it on social media or share it anywhere that registration is open and you'll get access to a discount code. So at the time of this recording, the first 5 people that sign up can use a 25% off discount code. Now that may change in the future if you're not listening to this currently, but the only people that get access to that coupon code are people that are on the wait list. So if you've been listening and you've been thinking, geez, I've learned a lot from this podcast, then imagine what you could learn in the training. I would love to have you if it feels like a good fit. So if it does, take a moment to just go down below wherever you're listening to this, click the link that says join the waitlist. And then at the top of the page, right in my picture, you just click that button and then enter your name and email. It's also at the bottom of the page. And if you wait long enough, there's a little slide out to the side, a polite pop-up that will also ask you if you want to join the waitlist. So for those of you who would like to study with me at some point, whether it's for the next one or one in the future, get on the wait list. Okay. One more reminder, my dear friends, that although I have the soul of a mermaid, I also have the mouth of a sailor, and that these podcasts are dealing with adult subject matter and adult language. So if you have small people around, grab headphones now. Okay, today's topic was actually a question that was messaged to me. And the reason that I thought it would be smart to go over is because this isn't an uncommon question. It happens. It happened to me at a point. I'll share my story as well. And if you didn't know that you could message me questions for possible topic ideas as long as they're yin related, because this is a yin yoga podcast after all, you can get at me on Instagram, either at Nick Danu Yoga or at Yin Yoga Podcast, and message me a question that you would like me to answer or a topic that you'd like to see on the podcast. And if I haven't done it already and it's yin appropriate, then I'll add it to the list, because I'm always wanting to have multiple ideas for y'all. So if you've got any burning questions, find me on Instagram, let me know. You can find me on Facebook too, just Nick Danu. I don't use my business page, so those of you that have followed it recently, sorry, you're not going to see anything there. But to be honest, I don't really spend a lot of time on Facebook other than the group, so that's not the best way to get a hold of me. But find me on Instagram, send me a DM, let me know if you have a question or a topic idea that you'd love to get covered on the podcast. Okay, so this was one of those. This was a question that I got. And before we get into the actual question, I want to share a story, and then I'll read you the question. So when I was in my very first 100, my very first time studying with Paul, I've studied with him many times since, and now have a 500-hour certificate with him. But this was the first one. I had done a weekend workshop with Paul in 2007 when he was still a traveling yogi, and he came to my city and did a workshop. So a weekend workshop. But this was my first official teacher training module with Paul. And we did our practice. And, at one point, I had to ask him a question about my body. So just to preface, sleeping swan, which in other styles of yoga sometimes is called pigeon, where your knee is in that pose depends on your bone structure. If this is news to you, if you're still a teacher going around telling everybody that one day their knee will be at 90 degrees in sleeping swan or pigeon, then please pause this right now. Check the show notes for a link to Anatomy for Yoga by Paul Grilly, and buy that streaming from Pranamaya and start watching that ASAP, because you could be injuring your students. So this idea, and I see it all the time in yoga circles, where if you just keep practicing, eventually your front leg will be at 90 degrees in swan pose. This is baloney. And actually very few people will comfortably be able to do that without risking injury. That's not the goal of the pose. The goal of the pose is to feel a stretch in your hip and your butt. So I just wanted to preface all of that before I tell my story. So I do have a good amount of external rotation in my hips. I also have a really decent amount of internal rotation. It's just one of my genetically open areas as far as my bone structure. I just have a good amount of range in those areas as far as my bones go. And that's not the same everywhere on my body. It just happens to be in my hips. I do not have any good range of motion in my shoulders, I can tell you that. So I was doing practice with Paul, and I am comfortably able to bring my front leg in sleeping swan or pigeon into a 90-degree angle. And in fact, at that time, especially because I was doing a lot more of that pose, that was the only way that I would feel a stretch, is if my leg was at 90 degrees. If I had my foot in closer to my groin, there was nothing there. And so I'm practicing this pose in my practice time with Paul, and my leg's at 90 degrees, and I'm laying flat on the floor over my leg. No bolster, no blocks, nothing. I'm just like laying flat. And I could feel a little bit of a stretch, but it wasn't a lot. Now, I would say in my current body, I would probably feel a lot more because I don't do that pose a lot anymore. I do other things for my hips. But at that time, I was feeling a very small amount of sensation, but not much. And so I, after practice, asked Paul if I could ask him a question. And I said, so when I do sleeping swan and my front leg is at 90 degrees and I'm as flat as I can go, like I'm laying down and I can't get any closer to my leg unless you hollowed out the floor. I said, I'm feeling a little bit of sensation, but not a lot. So I imagine in like 6 months or so, it's probably going to be gone. What do I do then? And he looked at me like a like a deer caught in headlights, almost like he couldn't believe I was asking the question. Now, Paul's a very sweet and warm man, so he certainly wasn't being judgmental. He was like a little baffled. And he looked at me and he said, then you're done. Like, there is no more. Like, if your leg is at 90 degrees and you're laying as flat as you can and you're not feeling it, then you're in maintenance mode. You're not going to keep feeling a stretch forever and ever and ever and ever and ever in a pose. That's not how the body works. And that really struck me, that story. I was like, oh, right. And maintenance mode. Okay. So then I'm just maintaining the flexibility that I have rather than trying to get more flexibility. So I was like, okay, problem solved. And in fact, in times in my life, I have actually intentionally stopped doing any sort of yin hip openers for a few months just to kind of let things tighten up again so that I can, experience that sweetness again. Here's the thing. My questioning came from a place of thinking that the point of a yin practice, or any yoga practice, we could argue, but since we're talking about yin here, that the point of a yin practice was the physical poses. And my question came to him from a place of trying to get better, air quotes, deeper, air quotes, stronger, air quotes, or more advanced, air quotes, in my yoga poses. So again, remember, I was still a fairly new-ish teacher, and definitely newer to yin. I'd done a workshop and I had his DVD, but I wasn't immersed in it the way I am now. This was my first training with him. And so I still did have a lot of that kind of baggage about, the point of yoga is the physical practice. And, I still had goal poses on my vision board and, was still kind of trying to do really strong kind of flashy, fun poses. That was still at that time part of my identity as a yoga person and a yoga teacher. It is not now. Things change with age and experience and wisdom. But at that time, that's where I was at. And so he said, well, then that's it. You're in maintenance mode. And I thought, okay. So then I can just do that to maintain the mobility I have and focus on sensations in other poses. So here's why I wanted to talk about this today. So that's my story of how that came up once. And if you look at yoga circles outside of yin, especially with a lot of the really seasoned teachers, the teachers that have been teaching maybe, 5 to 10 to maybe even 15 years longer than me, There used to be a lot of this, and there still is, unfortunately, in some styles of yoga. This misconception that if you just keep pushing your body and you keep practicing, that you too one day will do blank version of blank pose. And that's just not true. And if you believe that that is true, again, in the show notes, there's a link to Paul's anatomy presentation. Please, for the love of your own body and the love of your students' bodies, watch that, because your mind will be blown and you will not risk injuring yourself or your students with this silly idea of practice, practice, all is coming. Okay. So practicing a pose over and over again may or may not ever mean that you can do the full pose, because some of that depends on your bones. And again, if that's news to you, please check that DVD presentation out. Oh, sorry. I always say DVD because that's how I had it. It's streaming now. It's streaming. You can watch it online. So this idea that we have that the point, first of all, of yoga is the physical poses. That's problematic to start, because whether you're looking at yin or whether you're looking at a more kind of hatha practice, right? Originally, these poses in a hatha practice, whether that's Ashtanga, Vinyasa, gentle hatha, blah, blah, whichever one it is, the point of the poses was to create a body that was stable and healthy so that you could sit in meditation. So the point of the physical poses in the hatha yoga traditions, and of which there's many lineages, was to create a body that was stable and strong enough and healthy enough to sit in meditation. So let's go back. I don't love Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and I'm certainly not a scholar, but let's just hop back to that book for a little bit. And so as yoga teachers and yoga practitioners, we get all obsessive about the asana. So the first thing I would like to say in answer to the question, what do we do if we don't feel it, is to address that. So I'm going to read the actual question that I got. I'm not going to say the person's name, because, you know, privacy and all. And then we'll get into this a bit more. Okay. Here was the question. What about when you don't feel it physically? I don't feel it's, and she has in quotations, it working. So that functional element, which Paul and you are teaching, is not there. I'm able to hold these poses for 5+ minutes without fiddling, moving, or being impatient. I mean, it's bliss, don't get me wrong, but I'm tapping more into a restorative yoga, and I want yin. Okay, so that was the question that sparked today's episode. Let's just first of all talk about whether or not the poses are actually the point. I know it's a discussion, right? Because for a large percentage of people, the poses are the point. It's what they come to yoga for, and it's all they practice. They don't practice meditation. They don't practice, pranayama. They don't do any of these other techniques in yoga. All they do, they don't read the philosophy. They don't try to put the teachings of the philosophy into their life. They're just doing physical asana. And that is not necessarily a bad thing if it's done skillfully in a way that's healthy for your body. But we also have to eventually start to look at, like, what is the bigger picture of this practice? And the bigger picture of this practice are the more subtle aspects, like meditation, right? So whether or not you're feeling a pose, once you've reached the limits of your bone structure, you've gone into it, and that's all she wrote. That's as deep as you can go, like I was with my sleeping swan pose. Now you're in maintenance mode physically. And I realized that maintenance mode is not as sexy and is not going to sell yoga magazines. Maintaining the mobility of your joints is not something that is going to be a bestseller, unless you're probably in the age demographic where it's been starting to become very clear that you don't have the mobility in your joints that you used to have. So if you're if you're approaching your senior years and you're like, why aren't things moving the way they used to? Well, then maybe you'd buy a book that said maintaining the mobility of your joints. But for most people, that's not going to sell, not that title. So it's not flashy and it's not sexy. We always are I think as yoga people, we're always chasing stretch or chasing sensation. And that can be problematic. If you're always chasing stretch or you're always chasing sensation of stretch, that feeling, which can be quite addictive. And I've heard many, teachers that have taught probably another 10 years in addition to mine, they've been teaching for, somewhere between 25 and 30 years, talk about an addiction to feeling the sensations in the body, right? That too can become an addiction. And if we're not skillful, injurious to the body, right? There's all kinds of yoga teachers out there from not yin teachers, but more active, especially styles of yoga like Ashtanga back in the day that would just push through the pain and have ended up with hip replacements or knee surgeries. So there needs to be some wisdom to temper our practice. And an understanding that the point of a yoga practice isn't necessarily just the physical poses. So that I want to start with, that the point of a yin practice may not always be the physical poses. And I'll talk a little bit more in a moment here about other things that the practice can be about for those when you're in a pose and you're not feeling any sensation. So that's the first thing I want to address, is that the point of yoga isn't to be chasing sensation for the rest of our lives. That if you were thinking about hatha yoga, the point would have been, according to Patanjali, to create a body that's stable and healthy and can sit in meditation so that it can eventually merge with the divine, right? That was the whole point. Now, even if you're not a Patanjali style of yogi, if you tend to be a little bit more TCM or other philosophies, even from India, that's fine. But just know that like these physical shapes that we make with our body are sort of the least important part. So that's one thing. Yes, they're helpful. Yes, they can help us maintain the physical health of our body, but there's so much more that goes into a yoga practice. So for example, the nervous system. And if you don't know much about the nervous system, previous to this one coming out, there will be a couple of episodes there's one on the nervous system in yin yoga and trauma, where we talk a little bit more about the nervous system 101. But basically, to summarize very quickly, most of us are in a yang dominant culture where we're rushing and going and we're pressured and we're busy and we're stressed, right? Yang is good when it's harmonized with yin, but when we're in a yang imbalance, like most of us are culturally, unless you are lucky enough to live on your own land somewhere really quiet and unplugged from the world, then you're probably living in a yang dominant culture. This can be really hard on our nervous systems. And so we end up in flight, fright, or freeze way more than we should be, right? So fight, flight, or freeze is really helpful if a bear is chasing you. That's what's going to help you run like hell to get away from that bear. But it's not helpful when you're thinking about your bills or your taxes or your neighbors or what's happening politically or the wars around the world. You get my point. So we are, as a culture, in a yang dominant culture, and we are in a sympathetic dominant nervous state most of the time. And this has all kinds of terrible things that can happen to our health. Every single major disease can be linked to stress, whether it's heart disease, blood pressure, all of these things. If you don't believe me, Google diseases linked to stress, cancers, all of them. Stress affects everything. And so when we live in a culture like we do, which is sort of overly yang, like disharmonized yang, not nearly enough yin, we aren't resting enough. We aren't spending equal amount of time, if not more, which is, I believe, how we were meant to live, in our parasympathetic nervous system, the relaxation response. When that happens, then there is ill health or potentially disease that can happen in the body. And so one of the big benefits of a regular yoga practice is actually the nervous system response, right? When we can consciously and deliberately set time aside regularly to dive into our parasympathetic nervous system, that relaxation response, then we're affecting the whole health of our body. And you do not need to feel a stretch in your body in order to experience that switch from the sympathetic into the parasympathetic nervous system. You don't need to feel a stretch in your body to feel you switch gears into that more relaxed state. So, is it great and fun? And do we enjoy feeling a stretch in our poses? Of course. But if it's not there and you're kind of come to the limit of what you can do, and sometimes people will ask me, well, how do I know if I'm at the limit of what I can do? If you come into a pose and you're trying to go further or deeper or whatever, and you just feel stuck, you don't feel any pain, you don't feel a stretch, you don't really feel anything, you're just kind of stuck and you can't move and you're not sure why. That's because you just hit your bones, my friend. So that's all she wrote. Now you're in maintenance mode. As unsexy as that is, I realize. You know, they don't put maintenance stuff on the cover of a yoga magazine, but it's super important. So at that point in your practice, you're now maintaining the joint that you have instead of trying to go further. And so the nervous system can be a huge benefit of a yoga practice. So the nervous system is one of the big things that we can get from our yoga practice. In fact, for me, the longer I teach and the longer I've been a yoga therapist, and especially in, you know, I don't want to say post-pandemic times because I really don't, there's a lot of things that don't feel like they're over yet, but especially with the last few years and what we've all gone through collectively, the trauma we've all gone through collectively with the pandemic. And, you know, there's many different ways that trauma shows up. For some people, it was losing their jobs or their businesses. For some people, it was losing friends or family members. For others, it was mental health stuff because they couldn't get to their therapists or their NA meetings or their AA meetings. So anyways, I won't get into the whole pandemic thing, but all of us now have been sort of dysregulated. So our society was already kind of encouraging us to be in our sympathetic, that fight, flight, or freeze response beforehand. And then you throw something that stressful in. And let me tell you, the amount of people that have anxiety and stress that didn't really before, like, just added, you know, fuel to the fire, so to speak. So the longer I teach and the more experience I have, and the longer I've been a yoga therapist, the more I realize that actually for me, in my practice, and more even so when I teach, is the nervous system. That if my students get nothing else but an opportunity to switch off and to rest deeply, then I am successful. So now this begs the question of, well, if you're not feeling a stretch at all, are you doing a restorative pose? No, because the intention is still different. And so it might feel more gentle, but remember, a restorative practice is a whole practice on its own. And it has a whole bunch of guidelines and intentions. And I did do an episode on that. So you can listen to that, yin versus restorative, if you want to learn more about that. So it's not a restorative practice if you're doing your practice and in one or two shapes, you don't feel them anymore because you've been doing this a long time and you've reached kind of the limit of your bone structure, or maybe you just don't have a large range of motion in your bone structure. And so you reach it quite quickly. It's also possible. Doesn't mean you're doing a restorative practice. It's still a yin practice. Because there's other aspects of restorative yoga other than whether or not you're feeling a stretch. That is there. That is a marker, but there's others. Again, whole episode on that if you want to dive into that. So I wanted to mention that, first of all, we have to kind of maybe consider, you know, are we doing our yin yoga with our yang attitude, which was another episode that you can listen to if you're not familiar. You know, this efforting, striving, I have somewhere to be. Like there's no goal in the pose other than can you feel sensation in that area? And if the answer to that is no, well, then there's a whole other layers of practice that you can pay attention to. They're more subtle, but I'll mention a few. So they're more subtle, but they are key elements, in my opinion, to this practice. So first of all, you are taking time out for self-care, regardless of whether or not you're feeling that particular pose. Secondly, you're taking an opportunity to dive into your parasympathetic nervous system, which is what I just mentioned, that relaxation response. You are literally taking time on the ground to ground. So nervous system effects of the yin practice are huge. And when we come into our lives more and more often from a place of being in our parasympathetic nervous system, our relaxation response, then we are healthier because stress affects every single disease or health issue in our body. So stress levels affect everything. So we're taking an opportunity to switch into our parasympathetic nervous system, to practice some self-care, to rest instead of do, to be on the ground, which is crucial for grounding. So those are some of the other benefits of a yin practice that have nothing to do with physical sensation. Here's some more. Your mind. So sometimes yin's nicknames are the quiet yoga or the meditative yoga. And so you have an opportunity in each pose to observe what is happening in your mind. And again, just like with most of these, there's a whole episode on the mind, so I won't go into that a lot. But noticing that the mind kicks up a storm, right? And how can we learn to be more skillful with our mind? Can we practice mindfulness when we're in that shape? So we're in this pose and okay, well, we're not feeling sensation in our body. Well, can we perhaps use that as an opportunity to practice and explore mindfulness? Can you notice the air on your skin, the weight of your body on the earth? Can you notice any sensations in the places that your body touches the ground or where your body touches itself? Can you notice the air on your skin and the fabric on you? Can you notice the sounds that are present in that moment without getting caught up into that mind that likes to analyze, judge, or critique the sounds or decide whether or not they should be there? But could you just be present to that moment, noticing the sounds? So all of that is still present while you're in this yin shape that you're not feeling. Can you bring your awareness to those things? So there's so many aspects of being in a yin pose, and feeling the sensation in your body is only one tiny part. It's just one part. And so eventually when we practice long enough, we will come to this maturity because we will have shapes where we don't feel it anymore. And then we have to go, oh, okay. So if my practice is no longer about getting deeper or stronger into blank pose, then what is this practice about for me now? At least in that pose. Now, it could very well be that and this is the case for most people, that maybe there's a pose or two you don't feel, but you feel the rest, right? Might not be that you don't feel any of the shapes anymore. So that's what I would look at is what are the other aspects of a yin practice that you can explore while you are there? Can you do some mindfulness, maybe even mantra, if that's part of your practice? If you have trained with a teacher, you have a mantra, you have a mantra practice, you could do that while you're in that practice. Or you could just let your mind be present and aware to the moment by moment changing landscape while you're there. How does my breath feel? Where is my breath? What are the sounds around me? Can I feel my body touching the earth? Can I feel my clothing on my body? What does that feel like? Is my mind stuck in this sort of soap opera or circus Is there some drama going on in my mind? And if so, what is the subject matter? And is it the same subject matter? Am I in the future or am I in the past? Am I daydreaming? Like there's so much to notice in a yin practice other than sensation. Noticing sensation is great, especially if you do have some and if you are working at becoming more embodied and befriending your body more, then yeah, it's a crucial key part of the practice to notice that sensation and maybe watch how it shifts and changes over time that you're in the shape. But it's not the only thing to notice. There's so many other things you could notice. So if you're doing a yin shape and you're not feeling it anymore because you've reached the limits of your bones, that doesn't mean you're now doing a restorative practice. Because in a restorative practice, we're not working actively with our mind. In a restorative practice, that is all about like a yogic nap almost. Whereas in a yin practice, we are dealing with our minds, with the present moment, with discomfort. And I don't necessarily mean like physical discomfort, because I don't even like using the word discomfort, because I think for a lot of people, the line between discomfort and pain is blurry. And so somebody could think they're doing something in a way that's discomfort, but it's actually painful. So maybe the word uncomfortable might be a better word, right? Being present for minutes at a time is uncomfortable mentally, emotionally sometimes, because we don't do it very often in our culture. We're always go, 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 rush, rush, rush. And so then when we stop and try to do it, it's unfamiliar, it's uncomfortable. And that is something to observe and to work with in your yin practice. So, my friends, to summarize, if you reach a point in your bone structure where you no longer feel a yin shape, that's fine. You can still do that yin shape. Now, you could switch it up and do other shapes for that same area and see if one of the other ones kind of gives you a little bit more. It's possible. It's possible it won't, because you've just reached what you're going to do, right? And instead of going, well, geez, I mean, now what am I practicing for? Now is this restorative? No, it's not, because restorative has many other aspects to it other than just whether or not you feel a stretch. And so again, I did a whole episode on that, so you can listen to that one. What it means is that your practice, at least in that pose, for that class, for that day, because it could change, has now become more of the mental, emotional realm and less of the purely physical sensation. So now, when you no longer feel that pose, now we actually get to practice the big picture yoga, yoga with a capital Y, observing your mind, being mindful, being present, being curious, being open, noticing your mental and emotional states, becoming the little scientist of your own direct experience in that moment, and watching how that even changes from time to time, from moment to moment. So if you can be really present in the moment, you will notice that the moment is very alive, that each moment is so alive. And our practice doesn't need to just be about physical sensation. So if I were to sit here right now in a pose that I'm quite comfortable in and I don't really feel much, I would start to investigate the more subtle aspects of the practice. Like I would notice the air on my skin. For example, right now, my feet feel cool. My arms do not, because I have a sweater on. I would notice the sounds around me. I live in an urban location, so I can always hear traffic, which is why for those of you on YouTube, you always see the big headphones, because these are a little noise canceling. They help me focus. I can notice the weight of my body sitting on the cushion, and I can really tune into those areas where I'm making contact and just notice, is there any sensation there, a feeling of pressure or warmth or coolness or hardness or tingling or something else? I can notice my mind's tendency to want to get on with things to get on with my day, to plan, to future trip, or to hang out in the past, or to daydream. I can get curious even about that subject matter and see, is it the same thing that keeps coming up for me? And if so, why is that? So when we no longer feel a pose in a yin practice, we could say that is actually where the yin begins. Okay, my friends, I think that's a good place to leave it. If you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to rate it. Give me 5 stars on your apps, or if you're on YouTube, give it a like and subscribe. And again, if you have ideas for future episodes, please get at me on Instagram at Nick Danu Yoga. My name is spelled NYKDANU Yoga, or at Yin Yoga Podcast. Get in the DMs and let me know if you have a question. This is how this episode happened. A question from one of you sparked a little thought in my mind and reminded me of my story of my hips and pigeon. And now we have an episode. So if there's some burning topic related to yin that you really want to know about, please feel free to drop me a line and let me know, and I will add it to my list. All right, my friends, until we meet again, bye for now.